Yo, what's good, everybody? Welcome back to Bain Break It Down Forex. It's your boy Big Bain and this thing, and you guys guessed it. Another week, another opportunity for us to make some money in the Forex market. So let's get right to it. All right. Boom. Over on the dollar, guys. It's pretty clear, right? We made a nice run up last week, right? And at the end on Thursday, we started our retracement. We started pulling back. So I'm expecting us to continue in this pullback, right? Potentially to this fair value gap. All right. We do have a few demand areas here that we can rise from. All right. But because we have this imbalance that we broke out of last week, right? All of last week, we just shot straight up. So since that has not been mitigated, I feel like we're going to go ahead and push down, mitigate that imbalance before we rise up. But again, that may not happen. We may just rise right from this area. So we got to watch price to see what it tells us. All right. And then play it from there. But I'm still bullish on the dollar, but I see still a temporary fall, all right, or temporary drop, right, possibly to this fair value gap before we begin to rise. All right, so just watch out for that as the week opens. All right, bullish on the dollar, temporary bearish. All right, moving over to the JPY, right? JPY has been doing major things, right, all since last week. It gapped down at the open, right, and it's been falling ever since. Then we get to Wednesday, right, of last week, and we start to retrace, right? We start to pull back. We start to correct from this down move that we made, all right? So with that being said, guys, I expect the JPY to continue rising, right? Filling this imbalance, possibly getting to the supply area before we get the drop, all right? So if you're trading pairs like the AUD JPY, Euro JPY, GJ, CJ, NJ, EJ, right? All the J's, right? If you're trading those pairs, you can still look for those to fall, right, as the week begins, but probably in the middle of the week, look for them to start rising. All right, so that's on the J's. All right, moving over. So bullish on the JPY to complete the pullback. Again, remember, it's just the pullback, right? The overall direction it wants to go is down. All right, but for right now, it will correct itself from the last push that it made, which was massive, right? Come just straight down, right? So now we're kind of getting that same reaction in the retracement straight up, right? But once we get in here, guys, look for the JPY to fall once again, right? Bearish on the JPY. Okay, over to AUD dollar, all right? And AUD dollar is correlated with the dollar index. So as the dollar looks like it could potentially fall, the AUD dollar could start rising, right? Getting to this level of supply, which we'll probably see better here on the 15-minute time frame. And whoop, there it is. All right. So again, just trying to get prepared for that retracement back up. All right, guys, if you haven't noticed, all right, because maybe you haven't been trading for too long, but typically when you get massive moves, right, to either side, the upside or the downside, and especially like when it ends on a particular, week, that following week, the correction is made, right? So you have your opportunity, right, to look to take advantage of that correction, on these particular pairs that have made major moves. All right, so AUD dollar, if we get up to this particular high, that's already 94 pips, but we haven't balanced to the left, right here on top of that supply. So getting from the low all the way up, we're looking at over 120 pips. All right, I'm bullish on the AUD dollar, and then once it gets to supply, you guys guessed it, right, probably middle of the week also, and then we'll turn around and drop from there. That's when the dollar will be rising, when we get the drop from here. So again, dollar most likely will pull back to that fair value gap as the AUD dollar rises, and then when the dollar is at that fair value gap and it begins to rise, we'll be at the supply area, and then we'll begin to drop. So it's an easy way, guys, right out the gate to take advantage of buying the AUD dollar here, aiming for the supply, and then turning around and selling it right back down. So this may happen from Sunday on to Tuesday, possibly Wednesday, we get up here, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we see the drop. All right, I'm trying to lace you guys up. This is easy money. All right, bullish on the AUD dollar, and then we'll be bearish sometime in the middle of the week. All right, moving over to Euro dollar. Let's look at it from a higher time frame. All right, you guys can see, again, same exact thing, right? As the dollar is dropping, the euro is rising, right? And we have these levels, these lower highs that we have here on the euro dollar that it can easily go to take out, right? And tap right into that supply, right? And then drop. So again, for right now, on at the beginning of the week, I'm bullish on the euro dollar, but then once it hits supply, this is where I'm mainly looking to take that short position here, all right, and bring it all the way down to that support zone, all right, that demand area, all right. And it's all about supply and demand, and this is it in the simplest form. We have a level of supply, we want to sell from it. If we have a level of demand or a zone of demand, we want to buy from it. All right, that's how it goes. So temporarily bullish as we complete the pullback on Euro USD, then turning around to look for the sell. This will be the play to make, right? Coming down again, buying the pullback, we're going against the trend. The trend is down. All right, so buying the pullback again, it's just one of those things that if you're not really sure, what you're doing, right, then you can end up hurt, because again, trying to buy this and the pair showing that it's down, it could just continue falling, right? It doesn't have to mitigate these liquidity areas or get to the supply like in the time that you think it will, right? It could still go down, probably tap into the demand, and then head up into supply. right? So those are some of the things that, again, just being in the mix, you will figure out over time, right? But I'm trying to give it to you guys ahead of time so that you're right on time. All right, rock with me. All right, over to pound dollar, right? Same exact thing, guys. So just expecting a nice rise up to the supply area, and then I'll be selling it. All right, call pound dollar buy on my last live, all right, on Friday. And guys, it was, lights out, right? Just complete boom, right? So we were looking for it to get to supply to hit our take profit. It didn't get there just yet, but it most likely will once the week opens. All right, so again, bullish, just temporarily coming in the beginning of the week, but probably Tuesday, maybe midway, right, Wednesday, we'll start seeing the drop on pound dollar. All right, but be careful, because we may potentially get up to this area. Again, got a little bit of trend line liquidity sitting around this right here. All right, so we might really push on up, right, as the dollar pushed down, right? We might get above these supply areas, and we might tap into this particular supply area. All right, so be very careful not to sell too prematurely. All right, wait for rejections and then bearish candles to be at your supply areas. All right, and then take the sell. All right, so bullish temporarily for the pullback, right, possibly to any one of these supply areas, and then from there we'll get the drop, guys. So if you get it from this high, and just place your sell limit now, right, place your sell limit there and just take it right down to this low, 222. All right, angel numbers, 222 pips, easy money to that previous low that it made, guys. Right, this is how you set yourself up. You only need one trade. All right, this is it. If you can take out a standard lot on GU, which may cost you anywhere from $200 to $300, right, you'll be risking roughly about that amount, but catching 222 pips on a standard lot is going to give you $2,222. All right, it's worth it. All right, guys, so bullish, but then completely bearish once pound dollar gets up to the supply levels. All right, over to New Zealand dollar, and you guys did right. I see a bullish move being made on the retracement. All right, we can probably see it better on the 2 hour. There it is. All right, very nice, very clean structure. All right, so we'll get that rise up, get this engineered liquidity from this high, maybe tap into this supply, but since they're still in balance here, guys, clearly we can shoot all the way up to supply. There's 77 pips going up, and then guess what? Turn right back around and take it right back down for about 85 pips. All right, money's on the table this week, guys. I don't want y'all to miss out. Please make sure you hit that like button and tell your friend. You know what I'm saying? Hey, it's money to be made this week, man. Let's get to it. All right, they ain't lacing us up, right? We need to take advantage. All right, I know my team will. Again, we killed last week. It was beautiful, especially with SPY, NAS dropping, right, tanking. We made a lot of money on the J's with the JPY tanking, and even on the pound alt that I gave you guys in the weekly watch list last week, that did numbers. So again, it's the same thing every week, right? Something is going to hit, but if you're not in position, then you can't take advantage. All right, either way, bullish then bearish on pound New Zealand. All right, moving over to dollar CAD, and again, like I mentioned, the dollar is still in its pullback phase, so we're potentially going to see it drop down to this demand area. All right, and then from here we'll see it begin to rise. So temporarily bearish on the pullback, but overall bullish on dollar CAD, getting it from this demand to this high. We're looking at about 80 pips. All right, so not a whole lot on the table, but again, we can push above that demand area, and then even so, we may still sweep a little bit below here, right? Potentially getting a little deeper drop on the retracement, right? You just don't know how far it will go, but if you can see where the money is, then you have a good idea, right? So since there's liquidity behind this trend line, and we also have some imbalance right here, right, all up in this particular demand area, right, we could get that drop all the way down, right, like this, okay, 156, okay, and then potentially from here is where we'll get the rise back up for about another 180 pips to the upside. All right, so watch out for the drop first, right, to sweep liquidity, potentially mitigate the fair value and tap into demand, and then we'll be looking for the rise, right? We may get it from here, but we got some equal lows, so again, it may just get a little deep and then start to rise. But guys, it's ready. Okay, beautiful setups. Bullish on dollar CAD over to dollar CHF. All right, so we got up to our level of supply. It looks just like the dollar. All right, where it's still in its pullback phase right now, and it's probably headed to this demand area or potentially even this one. So it's just a matter of waiting, and then we got another imbalance sitting right about here. Okay, so we got to watch out for that. So we'll map this out just in case. All right, but you guys will have a good opportunity just kind of selling it right out the gate. Don't do it on this Sunday. All right. Right when the market opens, right? Maybe give it a little bit of time, let's say 9 p.m. Eastern time, anywhere around that time, you can start to get in, as the spreads will not be super high. All right, and the volatility will start back up, right? But any one of these areas is most likely where we're headed for the dollar CHF before we have a major rise up. So again, if you just prepare yourself with a buy limit at this area, all right, stops right below it, just like that, and aim for this high, okay, you're already looking at potential, all right, of making 160 pips off of this play, guys. Again, lacing you up, just gotta knock it out the park, guys. All right, bullish on dollar CHF, after the retracement to these demand areas, all right, over to $JPY. And like I mentioned, the $JPY is rising, so your J's, right, here's a $JPY pair, we're going to see that retracement, all right, so we can easily see, and who knows, maybe when the market opens a little later today, right, we might get that same drop or that gap that we did here, right, last Sunday. Look at that, 5 o'clock, just completely took off, right, and gave us 500 and some odd pips, you know, in 2 days. But if we just look at the move on that Sunday, right, whoop, there it is, you know, about 300 pips, right, in 6 hours. Just ridiculous. All right, so that can happen here. We can get about 300 pips, and yep, that's it, right? And when the market opens, so look for $JPY to continue that drop, that pullback, that retracement, that correction to our point of interest, which will be the demand area, this fair value gap, and potentially, you know, this area that we previously broke, right, the support area. So we can get a bounce from either one, the support area, right, the fair value gap, or the demand. How can we tell most likely where it's going to go? Glad you guys asked that question. All right, Fibonacci. Okay, put it from that low to the high, and here's the area that it's saying it's most likely going to get to before it decides to reverse and potentially go up. But because we know that this imbalance is here, we're going to take that into consideration, guys, and we're going to want to see price get lower, right? At least take up 50% of that imbalance, right? And then we'll potentially try to get in, you know, somewhere here for the trade, making sure that our stop is below the swing low. Why below the swing low? Why not below demand? Because when we look left, we see imbalance right there. All right, and that's always where price is gravitating to or being pulled to as like a magnet when, you know, it has not been balanced. Okay, that's just simply what it is. So we'll get a major drop coming down on $JPY, and then middle of the week we start to do the opposite. All right, so again, guys, just very nice setups across the board on the majors. And now, you know, we'll head over to the crosses, but guys, we got great setups. All right, so bearish on $JPY, but then we're going to have a massive move from these lows coming back up to the high, 683 pips. Okay, never know how long it's going to take, but this only took about a week, and that was probably 600. So just getting into it from here, it may take 3 days to get halfway, and then going into next week you may get the other 300. All right, but just one play from the low, right? That's how to go. All right, UJ, big time play, don't miss out. All right, moving over to pound odd, and there it is, right? So I'll show you guys from the higher time frame. All right, I took off the wedge, right? Had a falling wedge on here, but simply it took out liquidity from the support area of the wedge, and then completely took off to take out liquidity from the resistance area of the wedge, take out the liquidity, and now we're most likely just going to tap into supply and head right back down, guys. All right, because we have plenty of imbalance, so you want yourself with a position like this, risking about 34 pips to make 406 pips on pound odd, guys. It's just that simple. Again, I laced you guys up with this last week when we were here, right? And look what it did on a Friday at that. So 9 a.m. on a Friday, pound odd went bananas, right? Almost 400 pips in 4 hours. All right, so I do expect to see some volatility. We may break through this supply, right? Because there is imbalance way up here, and this is a bit of a trend line, right? So we can still just keep rising, right? But it's still worth the shot taking this potential trade from the supply area. The key is you don't just take it when it hits that supply area, right? You look for price to do what we call confirmation, give you confirmation. So it'll get up here, right? And then it'll create some sort of higher low, right there, right? And then it'll break above this high, right? Then it'll come back down and then break that low. If it does that, then you're waiting again. This is, you know, a game of patience, right? Testing your patience. Most traders don't have it, right? The market will force you to have it, all right, or to tell you to get up out of here. All right, but we'll wait for that retracement, right, back into a potential fair value gap, maybe even the supply area that broke this low, and then that's where we'll get into the sell with a very tight stop loss, like the short position you see here, and then that's when that bad boy will just completely make its way all the way back down to that demand area. All right, so don't just sell it when it gets to the supply, because again, it may still break out and go higher, right? You want to start seeing the momentum of the bulls start to flare out, like start to lose gas, all right? And at that point, that's when you strike. Okay, feel like a rope-a-dope, right, with Muhammad Ali, right? Just run around the ring, let your opponent swing, and the moment they gas out, that's when you put the whoop-de-doop on them. All right, so we're waiting to see when the bulls gas out, and that's when we'll gas up. All right, hit them with the whoop-de-doop. Okay, so again, pound odd, please don't skip it. All right, it'll get you paid. Over to pound CAD. All right, same exact situation, right? So we can push up to the supply area and then potentially fall, right? But as of right now, you can see just strong bullish movement. We got this gap that was created, so we may get a pull down first, and then we may go all the way up to these supply areas. But mainly what we're looking for is just to take advantage of when it gets to these supply areas, and we don't have to sit, you know, staring at the chart. We can just place our sell limit order right now, right? Get right above these highs and then bring it right back down to the low. But we have to be smart. Looking left, I'm seeing some equal highs right in this area. Okay, and if anybody knows about equal highs, equal lows, then you know this is where liquidity sits, guys. So as much as I want to just sell from this area, now looking left, I may want to place my sell limit higher to take into consideration the liquidity that sits here. All right, so boom, now I have a better risk to reward, right? Where I'm only risking, this looks like about 20 pips or so. All right, yep, 25 pips on the stop loss and 263 on the take profit, guys. This will be a great sell opportunity for you to place right out the gate, right? As you're watching this video, just go ahead and do it right now, right? And as the week goes, right, while you're doing what you got to do, right, whether it's working or chilling, right, the trades will be doing what they have to do, getting you the money that you rightfully deserve, all right? Especially with all the nonsense Trump got us going through. So, better try and do something, all right? So pound CAD, guys, I'm bearish, but I do see a bullish retracement first before we get the drop. All right, moving over to pound CHF, another great setup, guys. We just sweep this trend line liquidity. We tapped into this demand, and we're starting to get rejection of the bears. So what I'm looking for is a potential sweep of this previous week low, right? And then again, we're looking for that confirmation. So I want price to come up and create a lower high, okay? And then I want it to break below, but then come back and break above that lower high. At that point, you can already kind of see we'll have a little bit of a double bottom, right? But then this is just giving me confirmation that we're getting ready to head up. Once I get that break, guys, I'm being patient, right? This may be my demand area. This may be a fair value gap right here. And I'm just waiting for price to get into these areas and then have some bulls show up. Once that happens, I'm going to take my buy position, place it below the low, and aim for supply. If you do that, all right, you'll be looking at a situation where you have 140 pips with risking just about 20 to 30 pips on the stop loss, guys. And you'll have a inverse head and shoulders pattern, right? Which is a bullish reversal chart pattern, guys. It's just taking candy from a baby when you understand what you need to understand, all right? So again, pound CHF, right? I'm expecting the rise, but I'm looking for that confirmation before I take the buy for that rise, all right? And again, just, one of those situations where when you kind of understand what's happening, you can prepare for it ahead of time without having to stare at it all day and all night, all right, guys? So look to have some sort of buy limit at this weekly low, right? Give yourself enough wiggle room, right, to survive, if it wants to go a little lower, and then, you'll be happy that you set it and forget it, all right? Bullish on pound CHF. Over to GJ, again, same thing like UJ. I'm expecting a deeper drop, right? Plenty of imbalance here, right? Plenty of imbalance here, right? Another little demand area sitting right below here. So I definitely see GJ dropping right out the gate, especially since we're in the Asian session, or we're heading into the Asian session when the market opens, right? I can see, again, a nice little drop coming down. Right now, there's a situation where, we may just respect this demand area and start to take off, right? But again, all that you really have to do to take advantage of that or know that that's going to happen is, again, that whole standard confirmation, right? Where it gives you a bit of a lower high that it creates, and then it breaks above it, all right? When it does that, now you have your shift in price going from lower lows, lower highs to now a new high, right? And then a higher low, and then a higher high, higher low, higher high, right? That's how that'll go. And so you seeing that will be your signal, if you will, to enter it long from this demand area. But if you don't see this, then don't worry about buying it just yet, because it's most likely still going to drop, right? Again, that JPY is looking strong on its retracement to the upside. So these J pairs will still have some volatility or momentum, if you will, to continue falling, right? So right out the gate, bearish on GJ, but from any one of these demand areas, guys, we'll be headed back up, all right, with a massive position, 574 pips. Ariel, you know what time it is, we coming for you, all right? Bearish on GJ, but then bullish from our demand areas, right? Over to pound New Zealand. And on pound New Zealand, we kind of have equal highs right now, and you can see we pushed up from Friday, made a huge imbalance on that. So again, guys, we can just kind of take out the high, right? Maybe push a little high, and then we'll start to come to mitigate that imbalance that was made on Friday. Plus, we have liquidity sitting at these equal lows. We also have some trendline liquidity sitting behind here, all right? So there's a lot going on pound New Zealand to where it's lining up for a potential drop. And if we sell it from the high, we're looking at almost 500 pips going to the downside. I'm bearish on pound New Zealand. All right, silver, man, oh man, it's about that time, right? It seems like they won't stop going higher, but we got a bit of a double top, right? And we can get the drop. There's liquidity here, there's liquidity here, all right? And then there's demand down here. So again, all this can be ate up, right? Starting this week, but we want to look at it from a lower time frame to kind of get our potential entry, right? So what it's doing right now is just simply consolidating, all right? Building and engineering liquidity, which if I believe that silver's going to fall, then what do I expect to happen? Well, I expect the high of this consolidation to get swept, for price to potentially sweep these equal highs, right? And then for us to start going to take out liquidity behind the consolidation, the fair value gaps, right? The liquidity on the equal lows, and once again, the liquidity on these equal lows. So again, just a nice push up first. And then after that, guys, get ready. There's going to be a drop, right? A potential drop that you guys just want to be able to be in place for and take advantage of, all right? I'm bearish on silver. Right, over to our favorite gold. You can already see I have a short position here, but again, equal highs right to the left, right, that we got to take into consideration. And if you do, right, you'll put yourself in a better situation, right? You can sell it right now, but if you do, right, you got to have a higher risk, right? 74 pips, crazy. I mean, $74 move on gold, that's 740 pips. We don't want to, we don't want to risk that much, right? When we know that there's a potential for price to come and sweep this liquidity. So we just want to make our position higher. And now instead of a $74 move, we got a $25 move, 250 pips, right? On a micro, that's just $25, right? On a mini, that's 250. On a standard, that's 2,500, right? But what are we going to make, right? You're going to make $171 on a micro. You're going to make $1,710 on a mini, and then you're going to make obviously 17 bands, okay, on a standard. Just crazy money, guys, and a very easy play with a nice setup on it right now. And the reason why is because we did break this particular low. Now it's not official change because this low did not break this high, but it is a nice break of a low where we can kind of see with the way that gold is pulling back, it's pulling back in this diagonal fashion, right? So most likely, again, what's going to happen is just that we're just going to sweep, and then all of the liquidity that is built on this trend line is going to come and get that, right? Potentially tapping into this demand before going higher, right? Yes, gold just keeps making all-time highs, and people are scared to sell it, but everything has to make a correction, right? Let's just face it. If you bought gold from any one of these areas, let's just say you bought it from this low, or you just happen to buy it from here, and you see your profits shoot up like this, at some point you're going to take your profit, right? And that's going to create selling orders, right? And not only you, but other people are going to do the same thing. That's where we get our correction to the downside, right? So with that, we're just trying to catch it from the high, and then be a part of that correction, and then turn around and go right back in the direction that gold has been going in for the longest, which is up, right? So you can catch basically 171 points going down, and then turn around and catch another 160 coming up, right? It's just easy money, guys, right? So bearish on gold, watching out for the liquidity sweep before I sell it, and then once it gets down to these areas, I'll be once again looking to buy gold. All right, don't miss out. Over to, what is this, natural gas. Okay, and if we look at it from a higher time frame, all right, guys, we can see natural gas is ready for the buy, right? We got the break of the highs. These were equal highs, so we swept that liquidity. We went up and we made our new high up here. Since then, we've started to break structure, right? So we started breaking these lows, we broke this low, and now we've tapped into this demand area. There's a little bit more liquidity here off this trend line that we may potentially go and get. You can see my position is at the lower part of that liquidity, that trend line, right? So I'm watching out for that, but we may not get all the way here. We may get here, right? Respect it and start to rise again. It's just one of those things where you got to be patient, watch for that confirmation that I've been showing you guys to show up, and if it does, then you'll look to buy it from this demand area. If not, expect it to continue falling some more to this demand area and then take off. Very, very perfect setup on natural gas. Don't miss it, guys. All right, bullish on natural gas. Over to crude oil. All right, crude oil did make a drop, and this is potentially due to a ceasefire, right? So talking peace is always a good thing, but in terms of oil, right, it's not needed anymore. Okay, so the demand won't be there to have oil rise. However, right, we did get this drop, but we may start turning around just as a correction, all right, on oil back up to the supply area before we continue to drop again. Again, a lot of imbalance here on this move, so again, we may just get a push all the way back up, right? Sweeping this liquidity of these equal highs, filling the imbalance, tapping into supply, and then dropping from there. So as of right now, guys, oil looks very bullish. All right, we have a bit of a support level here where it's heading to. So again, we can tap into that before we get the retracement up. But I'm definitely going to be bullish on gold out the gate, and then I'll be looking to sell. Bullish on oil out of the gate, and then I'll be looking to sell oil from either one of these areas. The high being the most, the best area to get into that sell from. All right, bearish on oil. All right, SPY. All right, so this was talk of the town last week. All right, everything was red, right? Trump hitting people with tariffs and everything else in between. It was bananas, right? But I was already telling you guys the drop was on the way. All right, just like I'm telling you guys now, you're going to start to see a correction. We may push down a little bit more, right? We may potentially get right here to this low. We may even get to this demand area. All right, but this is just all about being patient. If you guys join in with me live this week, I'll be getting on at 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern time. All right, so at 9:30, we'll be able to see, what's really going on and potentially take advantage of the correction, right, that we're going to have from the drop that it made last week, right? It always corrects itself, guys, especially after big drops. So we're just going to be looking for that buying opportunity from these demand areas up to supply. All right, 351 points. All right, potentially on SPY. All right, so don't sleep on the beat. All right, I'm going to be on top of this all week. All right, over to NAS. All right, so bullish on SPY. And now NAS, again, same exact thing that SPY did, right? And we're now at a support level. So I'm going to be expecting a bit of a rise, potentially to where we broke, maybe even all the way back to the supply area. And you can see that's over 1,000 points. All right, guys, so we can really do some damage just knowing that the correction is coming, right? Granted, we don't just buy just because it's at the low. Again, it's all about the confirmation that you'll need to see on this lower time frame, which you may have to get super low, right? Get into that 1 minute time frame, and still there is no change in the structure from down to up, right? But once we see that on that lower time frame, that's when we'll take advantage of trying to catch the correction, the retracement, or the pullback. All right, so bullish on NAS, but boy oh boy, when it gets back up to the supply area, we're going to see a major drop, and I think that's going to come near the end of October when interest rates are announced, right? It may not, but that's just my speculation. All right, last but not least, US 30, guys, and look, we're already sweeping all the liquidity on this trend line. We have liquidity up here that hasn't been taken, but I'm just looking for price to give me a nice little push down, 439 points to that demand, and then from there we're coming right back up, guys. Again, almost 2,000 points on US 30 that you guys can take advantage of this week. All right, and again, this may happen sooner than later, right? We can't time when it will happen, but we can definitely position ourselves and be ready for when it does, and be able to take advantage. All right, so that'll do it, guys. I mean, very, very important week this week, especially having me live to walk you guys through these indices directly for you to be able to take advantage of. So I think you should tap in, all right, if you want to win. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Get everybody in. And I will see you guys whenever the Dolphins win. All right. This man didn't do that bag today, but it's all good. All right. So meantime, in between time, y'all know what it is. It's your boy. Peace.
Want to get money? Want to get paid? Master Forex, like a sensei? Then you know you got to come and swing my way. And if you want to fast forward, hit replay.